The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Well, hi everybody. Welcome to this very short session on promoting agility in teams to boost performance. So welcome. I just wanted to make sure that I'm being heard. It sounds like I'm coming across loud and clear, which is great. So I'm just going to spend about 30 minutes going through some tips and hints that'll help you with your team and some of the things that you need to think about in relation to agility. So let's get underway. The three things I want to cover today, basically, I think we use this word agility a lot. The question is, what does it actually mean when it comes to business? I think most of us understand what it means when it comes to sport, but what about business? So I hope that by the end of the session, you've got a little bit more clarity around what agility actually is. And in particular, what are the dimensions of agility that you could look at in your own team to improve its own capacity to be agile? I'm also going to look at some places where you might look to improve in terms of your team performance. And again, there's a price to pay for this because we've got to take time out in order to improve the quality of our team. And that does take a little bit of, it really requires you to down tools for a period of time. And I want to talk about how you might do that more effectively. And then I want to finish up talking about non-job roles. And the non-job roles that people play are, I would argue, just as important as the job roles that people play. And I think that one of the ways you can become agile is to start to focus on the non-job roles in your team. And I'll explain what they are. And in particular, what I want to look at is 4 non-job roles that I think are critically important to anybody who is successful as an employee or even as a manager. Okay, so let's talk about the term agility and what it actually means. So if we look at the term agility, as you can see on your screen there, to me, agility can mean a variety of things, and I don't think we spend enough time explaining exactly what that is. But to me, an agile business can respond quickly and effectively to the opportunities and threats, it's not just opportunities, found in its internal and external environment. So it's within the team and beyond the team. And it's looking at both opportunities and threats. So we'll cover those and we'll look at those in a bit more detail. Now I've identified 7 different dimensions of agility, and I want to share them with you. And I'll put these up on your screen now. And you can see that one of the reasons I put this together in one of my books is that I felt that, whilst we might understand what agility means, what does it actually mean when it comes to organisation? So I'm just going to spend a bit of time running through my model with you. You'll notice that the 7 dimensions around the outside, and I'm going to start at 12 o'clock and go clockwise and just explain to you very briefly what each of them means. Now, I recognise that some of you are working in the public sector and the not-for-profit sectors, and I also recognise that some of you are working in the commercial sector. So innovation will mean different things to different people, obviously, depending on where you are in the organisation. But innovation essentially means coming up with a new idea or a concept and being able to get it out to market as quickly as possible. So the most famous example, perhaps in the last 20 years, was touchscreen technology, which was developed by Apple. And Apple were quick to develop it, but also they were very impressive in terms of how quickly they got it to market. And as a result of that, they took significant market share. And for a long period of time, their competitors had to play catch up. But essentially what happened is that Apple took a huge market share because of this technology. And of course, now we expect everybody is going to have touchscreen technology. But innovation, if you're in the public sector, could mean a new way of doing things or a process or a procedure that might be different to what had ordinarily been there. So it can range in terms of that. So that's what innovation is. Now, the second form of agility there is processing. Now, by processing, I'm talking about speed. Most most of us get frustrated when we want something and we want something very quickly, and it takes a long time for the processing to occur before we can do that. So we might be taking a loan out from a bank or something, and we might have to wait several weeks before we get approval for that loan. And of course, we get quite anxious about that. So what I mean by agility in terms of processing is to be able to reduce the time a process takes to get done, but not to sacrifice the quality of that process. So it's not necessarily about cutting corners, but it's about being able to examine the process and to be able to get things processed faster with the same degree of scrutiny and quality. Now, recovery speed is an interesting one because we as human beings, of course, are not infallible. We all make mistakes. And of course, teams make mistakes, organizations make mistakes. And the reality is that often what happens is that we don't recognize those mistakes. We try and sweep them under the carpet, or we point the finger at blame at somebody else or something. We don't often take responsibility for that. And it's often because we get punished for our mistakes. However, I think in terms of recovery agility in a team, what it means is to recognize that we all make mistakes, and that when we do make those mistakes, we are quick to recover. And that's essentially what that means. So, for example, if you went to a restaurant, you ordered a meal and the meal came out and it was the wrong meal, the waiter apologized profusely, took it away and brought out the right meal for you. You can, and if they did that in a reasonable amount of time, let's say under 20 minutes, it might well be that you can be quite forgiving in those circumstances because you recognize that mistakes can be made. And I think most organizations are the same. So one of the ways of being agile is how quickly we can recover from the mistakes that we make in order to minimize the damage that those mistakes have made to the end user. So those three forms of agility, innovation, processing, and recovery, are very much based on speed, how quickly we can do things. So let's move on now to continuous improvement, and I'll spend a bit more time on that on the next slide. But continuous improvement, of course, is different from innovation. Innovation is coming up with a completely new way, whereas continuous improvement is about improving on what's already there. So I've split them up in the model because I think it's important to recognize that both of those are applicable to your team and what you do. So continuous improvement is very much about being able to improve things, do things better, faster, easier, safer. And of course, all teams should be in the business of continuous improvement. So it's another form of agility. But again, the enemy there is, of course, the time that it takes to be able to implement a continuous improvement. And because it does take a little bit of time, and it takes time away, of course, from our core business, we tend to forget about it or we ignore it. And then, of course, once it gets to a stage where it can't be ignored, we deal with it. So an agile team, in my view, is a team that will always be looking at trying to improve how they do things. Again, if we use a sporting analogy, it would be, if you look at any great sporting team in the world, and there are many that we can think of, one of the attributes of a sporting team, a high-performing sporting team, is a team that is always in a process of continuous improvement. So in a business sense, we should be taking a leaf out of sporting teams and doing the same thing. Now, customer responsiveness is pretty much a concept that we should, and again, we don't recognize it always. Everything that we say, think, and do in a team should, in fact, be very much directly or indirectly benefiting the team or the end user that we have in mind. Because otherwise, what's the team for? Every team, regardless of your internal service provider or you have customers, external, whatever your team does, the reality is you have an end user. Somebody, of course, somewhere is relying on the services that you provide or the goods that you provide. So it's important to keep the focus on the customer. And of course, an agile team, if they can keep the focus on the customer, is able to maneuver very quickly and be able to change their processes depending on the needs or the changing needs of the customer. So customer responsiveness is a critically important part of that. Now, the the next one, of course, is problem solving. We need to be able to solve problems reasonably quickly, and we need to be able to resolve problems very effectively. So it obviously has to be part of the jigsaw of agility in a team. So we need to be able to have processes and systems in place that not only detect mistakes early, but also are able to actually rectify them quickly. And if there's a low trust in your team, then it's likely that people will be reluctant to come forward when mistakes are made. And of course, that creates all sorts of problems downstream. So customer focus is a critically important part of any team, regardless of whether you're public sector, private sector, or not-for-profit. Now, the last dimension, number 7 on the list here, you can see is changing direction. Now, you might say, well, why have I got it there? Well, if you look at all the other 6 dimensions of agility, all of them at one level or another are actually about changing direction in some way, shape, or form. So I thought it was important to put that in the model, that ultimately, if we're looking at agility, it's about changing direction. It's usually about changing direction quickly and effectively. So I put it in there just to remind us that really agility in a team is really about changing direction, regardless of what that direction might look like. Okay, so that's the model of the 7 dimensions of high-performing teams. And now I'll go on and just talk a little bit about that one of these, which is this continuous improvement dimension of agility. Let's just talk about that for a moment. I think one of the things that you can do is do an audit in your team and actually look at what can be improved. And of course, that can seem like a daunting task, because you might think, well, there's a lot of things that I can improve in my team, and it may well be true. And I think one of the rules of thumb here is not to go ahead and try and change everything in your team. That's not really a good idea. It's just too time consuming. You've got to keep the wheels of business turning at the same time. But here's a little checklist that might help you in terms of where you might start. I would suggest that the place to start is where the things that your team are most occupied with. So if you looked at your team and you thought, well, what do we do? I mean, if it's sales, then obviously you'd look at sales. If it's writing reports, then you'd look at report writing. If it's some sort of a compliance issue, you'd look at compliance. So the reason why you start at some of the big chunks of activity that form in your team is that by doing that and making a small improvement of, say, 10% in terms of improvement, it's going to have exponentially a significant improvement in your team's performance. That's why I always think it's best to start with the large things. So some questions you might like to ask are things like this. How can we improve our quality? So we're all in the business of providing a service or some sort of a product. So how can we improve the quality of that service or that product? How can we increase our responsiveness to our customers? So what is it that we can do to make sure that we are more responsive to the needs of the customer? And responsiveness in this case means 2 things. It can mean terms of how quickly we can turn around a customer request, or it could mean being responsive in the sense of giving the customer precisely what they want with very little fault in that regard. How can we reduce the costs of doing business? Now, costs could be hidden or they could be real. You could see them or you may not see them, but basically running a team is a costly exercise. If you just simply think about your meetings that you might have once a week, that's a costly exercise. You won't see the cost in the budget, of course, but ultimately when you get 6 or 7 people together in a room and you spend an hour with them, there's a cost associated with that. Obviously, there's 7 or 8 hours, depending on how many people are in the team, multiplied by 2, because while people are in the room, they're not actually doing the work that they're required to do or get paid to do. So in actual fact, if it's a team of 7, it's 14 hours of time taken up. Now, 14 hours a week of time is significant. That's a cost to the business. So how could you make your teams, for example, more efficient and effective in order to be able to deal with that? How can we maximize our output? So, for example, if we're producing X amount of output with the team that we've got, how might we increase that output without putting undue pressure on our team members and our system? So it might be about actually improving the output of what we actually do. How can we actually reduce the safety incidents in our team? So obviously, if you're an outdoor team or you're working in an unsafe environment, safety is paramount. Safety is paramount anywhere. But what can we do to reduce the incidents of the accidents and the incidents that occur? What sort of things can we put in place to safeguard ourselves against some of the accidents that might occur through a lack of safety? How can we meet our deadlines more effectively? All teams have deadlines. We've all got things we've got to meet. We've all got targets we're aiming for. The question is, do we hit those targets, and how might we hit them more effectively in terms of meeting the timeframes of those targets? How can we enhance the cooperation with our stakeholders? This is one that's often neglected, but at the end of the day, you're only as effective as the team, as your stakeholders allow you to be. So it's really important to make sure that you can increase your cooperativeness with your stakeholders and other people that you might be relying on. How can we streamline our systems and processes? Now, our systems and processes, of course, are the way we do business. All systems and processes can always be updated and improved. Some of them can even be eliminated, and others perhaps can be modified. So take a look at your own systems and processes, the way you do business. What can you do as a team in order to improve the way you do your business? So there's a list, a little checklist, if you like, of some of the things that you might like to keep in mind in relation to improving the quality and output of your team. Now, I want to share with you the non-job roles I talked about at the outset, and I'm just going to put up a model and let you have a look at this. So let's look at the work that people do in teams. Ultimately, the work that people do in teams is two-dimensional. One-dimensional, of course, is the job, which comes around with the job description. So what's in the job description will very much dictate what people have to do. So there's some technical skills. Now, I don't want to touch on that today. I'm assuming that you've got a well-qualified team, an experienced team, a team that are doing a good job in that regard. Okay, so just leave that aside for a minute. Let's look at the other dimension, which is often not considered. The other dimension that's often not considered is the dimension that I call the non-job roles that people perform. Now, non-job roles are things that aren't necessarily on the job description, but are still critically important to the success of a team. And for quite a period of time, scholars have been looking at non-job roles for at least the last 20 years. And they've been squabbling about what job roles would be relevant to all industries. And I decided and bit the bullet and decided that I should come up with 4 that I think are relevant to all industries. And I'm sure these 4 would be relevant to you. So let's look through these 4 and consider them in a bit more detail. One non-job role that's critically important to team success is positive attitude and enthusiasm. Now, positive attitude and enthusiasm doesn't mean people coming to work bouncing off the walls with excitement. It's probably not likely to happen. But it certainly doesn't mean backbiting, playing politics, pointing the finger of blame, and all of those sorts of things, the behaviours that we see too readily in our teams. So we want people to be solution focused. We want people to come to work with a good positive attitude and are willing not to contaminate the rest of their team by having a poor day. We all have a poor day. But the point is, people who have a negative attitude and a lack of enthusiasm will contaminate the team at some point. So I think it's fair and reasonable for us to expect that people will have a positive attitude most of the time when they enter into a team environment. But again, it's not written in the job description, but it's still critically important. The second non-job role that I think is critically important in this day and age is being a team player, or the team role as I put there. At the end of the day, organisations are now much more flat. They're flatter than they were once upon a time. And of course, what it means is that we are now called upon to work in teams far more readily than we have ever been. And this requires us working with individuals and others who we may not normally work with for a period of time. So to suggest that we're not a team player is something that is not relevant in this day and age. We expect everybody to be a team player. But I often hear people say to me, "Oh, look, I'm just not a team player. I just come to work and do my job, and that's it." So having an aptitude to be a team player is extremely important in terms of performance in a team, because someone with a selfish attitude obviously is going to impact on the team's overall performance at some point during their working life. The third non-job role is a skills development role. I think it's reasonable to expect that people will continually upgrade and develop their skills and not stand still. In fact, if you don't upgrade and develop your skills in a team environment, you're actually going to go backwards, because ultimately it's going to mean that other people are going to do that, and you're going to be. So I don't think it's reasonable for a person in the team to say, look, I don't want to use that spreadsheet, or I don't want to use that customer relationship system. I'm comfortable using this old system. To me, that's not relevant now. I think it's important for us to get on board and to continually grow and develop. Now, this non-job role is not something that's just in the interests of the team. It's also in the interests of the individual as well, because obviously if somebody can develop themselves continually, then it's likely that they're going to be of value to a future employer. So it's not just something that is relevant to the team's output. And the final non-job role here is innovation and continuous improvement. Now, this role is really about trying to make the organisation, or at least the team, more efficient and effective in what they do. So in this case, it's looking for ways and means of making the team more efficient and effective in the workplace. And a lot of people in teams think that's your job as the team leader, but the reality is it's everybody's job, and not everybody can have all the answers to all the possibilities about how we can improve our team output. So engaging your team in conversations around innovation and continuous improvement. But again, you won't see that necessarily in a job description. And I would put it to you that if you only focus on the job role on the left-hand side, then it's likely that your team is going to be suboptimal in performance. So my suggestion is that you should focus on the non-job roles as equally as you would on the job roles. And you should explain to people your expectations around those four things, which I don't think is unreasonable. Think about a team that's highly skilled. Now, a highly skilled team where everyone has a very poor attitude, no one is a team player, no one is growing, developing in their role, and no one's coming up with any ideas to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of the organisation, that's not going to be a high-performing team. So another way of looking at agility is looking at the non-job roles. Now, let me demonstrate to you the case here. A survey was done in 2012, and the survey asked a number of employers what they were looking for most in their team. What were the key attributes that they wanted in people who were employees in their organisation? And this is what they came up with. Number one, they wanted people who were enthusiastic and demonstrated a positive attitude. Number two, they wanted people who had good communication skills. Number three, they want people who are self-motivated and show initiative at the right place at the right time. Number four, they want people who are honest. Number five, they want people who, enjoyed working with other people. They liked people, because business is very much about people. They wanted people who are persistent and didn't just give up at the first stumbling block. They want people who have ability to work in a team. They want good organisational skills and ability to work under pressure, to have some degree of resilience. And number nine is they wanted a willingness to learn and to continually grow and develop. And number 10 is they wanted someone who was dedicated and they could be relied upon. They were dependent, in other words. Now, the interesting thing about this list, when people were asked, is you can see that there is absolutely no technical skills in there. These are all non-job roles. So I really wanted to point this out to you, that this is critically important in our success. We all value it very highly, But interestingly enough, we don't talk about it very much. We focus very much on the job role, and we talk about the job description, but very rarely do we talk about these things here. And these things here, of course, are critically important to our team success. Okay, moving on. If we look at I was just going to finish up by saying that sorry, I'm just having a few issues here. Just pardon me for a moment. Yeah, so if you'd like to get a copy of the book, you're more than happy to do that as such. So I'll leave that with you. My book's coming out. Well, it's difficult to say with the environment, but it's coming out in a very short space of time. Those of you who have just joined, I'm going to be running through this process with you again shortly. I had 2 sessions running here, so you're not late. You're just on time. So just hang in there and we'll go back and I'll go through the process again very shortly. So thank you for those who've just joined. We'll catch up with you at another time. And for those that have just, thank you for those that have joined. Those that have just joined, just hang in there. We'll start in a couple of minutes. Thanks, everyone. All the best. Well, hi everybody. Welcome to this short session on promoting agility in teams to boost performance. It's always an interesting topic because we hear this word agility a lot of the times, and we kind of wonder what it all means. Because I think in a sporting context, we're aware of what agility is, but what is it in relation to a team, and how might we improve our capacity to be more agile, and even indeed, why do we need to do that? So I'm hoping to answer those questions in our short session this morning. So welcome wherever you are. I'm hoping I'm coming across loud and clear. If I'm not, just indicate in the question box there, and I can do, well, I don't know what I can do. I'll do what I can. Okay. Three things I want to actually cover directly today. I want to talk about what is agility, and what I'm going to share with you is 7 dimensions of agility. And while I'm sharing those 7 dimensions of agility, you might like to consider your own team in the context of those dimensions and see what they're going. Thanks, Chris. It's good to hear that the sound's coming across loud and clear. In the second, what I'm going to look at second is where can you make improvements in your team? Now, the problem, of course, with team improvements is that we're all busy people. So the question is, where do you find the time? Where do you start? All those questions become critically important. But of course, the flip side is true, that if you don't continuously improve the team, it's likely to go backwards. And I'm going to finish up talking about the concept of non-job roles and how critically they are to your team, how important they are, and what they actually mean. So we actually look at that as well. So we'll cover a lot in 30 minutes. And of course, I'll be sending you a copy of the slides and the recording at the end of this. So let's get stuck into the program. So here's a definition of agility, and there's a few definitions out there, but to me, the definition of agility is, and particularly when it comes to organizations, is how you can respond quickly and effectively. So it's not just about speed, it's about being effective as well to opportunities and threats. So it's not just about opportunities, but it's also about threats, both within your organization, because most of your teams would be embedded in an organization, but also to the external environment. Now, I mean, what we're going through with COVID, of course, is a good example of some of those external threats that we've been facing. So that's essentially what I mean, at least, by agility. So let's talk a little bit further about that. And what I want to do now is share with you basically a model which shows 7 dimensions of agility. Now, I put this together because it's all very well for us to say that teams need to be agile, but what does it actually mean, and what are the dimensions of agility that you can look at in your team? So let's go through those, and you'll notice that there are 7 dimensions, and I'll just cover those very briefly. And we'll start with innovation up at the top at 12 o'clock, and we'll go clockwise around and just very briefly touch on those. But as I mentioned, as I go through those, you might like to think about your team in terms of how it might respond to each of these things. So innovation is about getting a product or a service, or getting something that's brand new out into the marketplace. So I know we've got people here from the public sector, the private sector, and not-for-profit. Innovation doesn't necessarily mean a commercial endeavour. It could mean a new process or new procedure, the way we do things, and so on. Now, if you think about a very good example over the last 20 years is Apple's touchscreen technology. They were the first to market, and of course they took huge advantage because they were first to market. And in fact, it took a lot of the competitors a long time to catch up. But all the while, of course, Apple was making huge profits because they were quick to market with that technology. Now, of course, we just expect that whenever we pick up a piece of technology, to expect it to be touchscreen. So innovation is about not improving, but about putting something in place that hasn't already been there, a new service or a new process or whatever. Processing if we just go around the wheel now, processing is really about how quickly you can process information in your team. Now, we've all been frustrated at some point when we've found that other people, may, or in our mind at least, have taken a long time to be able to get us an answer to our query. So we might be looking for a bank loan or something, and the bank might take 2 weeks to give us the approval for the loan. And of course, they've got to go through a process in order for that to occur, and we accept that. But what agility means in terms of processing here is how can we speed up the rate of which we process things in our team, but not to sacrifice the quality either. So it's not about cutting corners. It's about how we can do things faster with the same degree of scrutiny. And of course, that can be really important in lots of different organisations. In fact, I'd argue all organisations. The third one there is recovery speed. Now, interestingly enough, it's not so much interesting, it's very true that all of us, being human beings, make mistakes all the time. That's the reality of it. Teams make mistakes all the time. Organisations make mistakes all the time. Making mistakes is human. The question really for you and me is this: when a mistake is made in the team, and inevitably it will be, so the first thing is to acknowledge that it will. Obviously, you try to minimize it, but it's going to happen at some point. The question you've got to ask then is, how can we recover quickly from the mistake? So recovery speed is all about a quick recovery. So for example, a very simple example, you go to a restaurant, you order a meal, and the meal comes out and you find that the meal's not what you ordered. And of course, the waiter takes it away and apologizes profusely. And within 20 minutes, you get the meal that you ordered. Now, you're probably still a little bit miffed about it all, but the fact that the restaurant was responsive to your need and the mistake that they inevitably made, means that you may be a little bit more forgiving in terms of your own assessment of that restaurant and the quality of its service. So how quickly can you recover from mistakes? Now, this is easier said than done, because in a team where there's a lack of trust, what you're going to find is that people will, of course, apportion blame somewhere else or point the finger, and it'll be somebody else's fault. So in those sort of circumstances, it's not going to be quick to recover from speed. So high trust is really critically important to recovery speed. So those first three dimensions, innovation, processing, and recovery, are all about speed. It's all about getting things done faster, and they become critically important for agility. The fourth one there is continuous improvement. Now, I've separated that from innovation because it is a different thing. Whereas innovation is creating something totally new that's never been created before, continuous improvement is about improving on what's already there. So if you look at any good team in the sporting world, and there are plenty of them, one of the qualities I'll guarantee that they have is that they're always in a state of continuous improvement. They're always trying to improve what they do. That's, it's just part and parcel of being a high-performing team. So if it's good enough for a sporting team, it's probably good enough for us. And you might say, well, where do we start with continuous improvement? Well, I'm going to cover that shortly. But I just want you to acknowledge or recognize that continuous improvement is part of the deal of of agility in a team. The next one is customer responsiveness. Now, the reality is, regardless of what your team does, you have end users. There's somebody somewhere that relies on the services that you provide or the information you convey. They basically are your customers. You can conceptualize them as that, even if they're not in a commercial sense. Now, everything you say, think, and do in your team should actually be directly or indirectly focused on the end user. And this is important, and it's often overlooked. We often do things for a variety of reasons in teams, but we forget that ultimately at the end there is somebody who relies on what we do. And therefore, if our focus is on them all the time, then it's likely that we'll take into consideration the constraints that that'll put the end user in, or perhaps the advantages that they may gain from that. So it's important that we actually are focused very much on the end user or the customer. Problem solving, of course, is how quickly we can solve problems in teams and to do them in a methodical way. Now, some problems, of course, are unique and require a completely new way of looking at things. But I would suggest that 80% of the problems that we face in teams are probably problems that we've faced before. So as a result of that, we should have systems and processes in place that will allow us to be able to solve problems rapidly and effectively. And if we can do that, of course, that's another dimension of agility in a team. Now, you'll notice that I've got changing direction as number 7 there on the model. Now, what I've done is that if you look at the other 6 dimensions, they are all have something to do with changing direction. So I thought, because it's a theme through this model, that I would make it as a separate category, that changing direction is a critically important dimension of agility in a team. In fact, it is what agility is, not only to change direction quickly, but to do it effectively as well. So I put it down there as number 7 on the list. So you can use this model as a bit of a checklist to look at your team and say, well, where can we start? Where can we start to be more agile than we currently are? And what can we do in that regard? So what I'll focus on now is continuous improvement, which I talked about before. And let's take that as one example of where you might start. Now, when it comes to continuous improvement, there is myriad ways that you can continuously improved both individually and as a team. And one of the big stress points I find when I'm talking to my clients is, where do I start? Well, my suggestion for you is to start with the things that people do most. So, for example, if you've got a sales team, then obviously selling is the thing that people do most of. So that would be the place to start. Why? Because it takes up a huge chunk of time. And because it takes up a huge chunk of time, by getting a small change in that area will make a big difference. If what you do is say in the teaching area, then that's where you need to make your continuous improvement. If what you do is writing reports, then that's where you need to spend your time and effort and energy. So don't look for some obscure thing, look for the thing that you do most of the time. And then when you've found what that is, then you can ask yourself these questions, and I put them down as statements here, but you can say, well, how can we improve the quality of what we do? So you're either in the business of providing a service or a product. So one of the questions for continuous improvement is, how can we improve on the quality of that? How can we actually increase the customer responsiveness? So in other words, are we ignoring the customer at different points? What can we do to embrace the customer more, whatever the customer might be, whether it's a end user or a stakeholder or whoever it might be? What can we do? So that's open for continuous improvement. How can we actually reduce costs? Now, all teams have significant costs associated with them that aren't normally put in a budget. So, for example, if you have your weekly meeting with your team, perhaps it's a check-in, a work in progress, perhaps you're doing it online, regardless of where you're doing it, that's a cost to your business. That's a cost to your team. What do I mean by that? Well, if you've got 6 people in your team and each of those people are spending an hour at a meeting, then there's 6 hours of time taken up already. But the fact is that while they're sitting in the meeting, they're not doing perhaps what they're getting paid to do, which is whatever it is. That's actually 12 hours taken up by being in a 1 hour meeting once a week. So that's a significant cost to your team, and you multiply that by, I don't know, 52 or whatever it is, it adds up. So how can you reduce the costs associated with your team? How can you maximize the output? So it's not about necessarily increasing the team size or the staff. You might have an opportunity to do that, but probably not in the environment we're in. So the question is, how can you maximize output with the same resources? Is there anything that is open to you to be able to do that. If you're working in an environment which is very safety conscious, or of course we all should be safety conscious, but I'm talking about perhaps an outdoor area or a construction area or something like that, then obviously safety is a critically important issue that should be considered daily. So the question there is, how can we improve the quality of safety to make sure we minimise the number of incidents that occur from accidents? That's a continuous improvement area. Deadlines. We're all in the business of meeting deadlines, regardless of what those deadlines are. We've all got sort of deadlines. Some of them are arbitrary, some of them are not. But the reality is, how can we make sure that we meet our deadlines more effectively than perhaps we already are? And that might be both an individual and team challenge. So that might be an area open for continuous improvement. How can we improve our interpersonal cooperation with other teams in the organisation, or in fact our stakeholders beyond the organisation? This is an area that's very much neglected in teams. So what can we do as a team to actually look after our stakeholders more effectively? What can we do to build up a better working relationship with the team in our organisation that we work with? All of those things are open to continuous improvement. And of course, the last thing is how, and I've sort of touched on this previously, but what can we do to improve our systems and our processes? Could we eliminate some systems? Would it make a difference? Do we need to include another system? If we've got systems in place, what can we do to be able to change them to make them more effective? Could we look at those and try to improve the way we go about what we do within our team? So you can see there is a myriad of ways that you can actually continuously improve the output of your team. So you just pick one area and make some improvement in that area. And if that area happens to be something which occupies the majority of the time in the team, then it's obviously going to exponentially make a significant difference. And that would be the place to start. And then you can ask yourself those questions, or some of them may be relevant, some of them may not. Okay, now what I want to focus on here is the concept of non-job roles as another opportunity to develop or promote agility in your team. And I think it's an extremely important area that's often overlooked when we talk about the concept of agility. We normally talk about agility in terms of processes or systems, but we don't think about agility in terms of people's performance. So let me just map this out for you. Let's look at the work that people do. And if we look at the work that people do, we basically have got a job role. So obviously that's what people do in their job, and that requires some technical skills. Now, I'm not going to touch on that because we all probably have got that well under control. And if we haven't, well, that's the first area I'd suggest you work on. But there's a whole nother dimension that often doesn't get talked about when it comes to teams. And I want to share that with you. And I call this non-job roles. Now, non-job roles are roles that aren't necessarily on the job description, but nevertheless are extremely important in terms of the productivity of the team. Now, scholars have been looking at this for the last 20 years at least, and they've been sort of, discussing this issue, and they haven't come to any resolution around what some generic non-job roles might be that impact on all organisations regardless of what they do. So I had a go at this, and I came up with 4 that I think are critically important, and I think you'll find that each of the 4 are really relevant to your own team. So number 1 is a positive attitude and enthusiasm. And now by that, I don't mean people coming to work bouncing off the walls with excitement. I'm not suggesting that that's going to necessarily happen. However, I don't expect people coming to work whinging and whining and complaining and backbiting and playing politics and all the rest of it. We see this very, very often. And we as a team leader must put a stop to that and say that that's just not acceptable. We want people who are solution focused. The fact is, if you've got one person in your team who is perpetually in a negative attitude, it's going to impact significantly on other people in the team and beyond the team. So I don't think it's unreasonable to expect people to come to work with a reasonably positive attitude. Now, we all have our off days, obviously, but you don't want to have an off day every day. So I think it's fair and reasonable about that. The second role that I think is critically important is the team role. The truth of the matter is that in the world of work that we're in now, organisations are a lot shorter. We don't have the hierarchy we once had, and we're expecting people to work in teams. Some of those teams are in teams where people don't know each other, so it might be a disciplined team, or it might be a team of people who get together to discuss a problem, who will disband after the problem has been resolved. So a team role is important, but I often hear people say to me, oh, I'm not a team player. I just come to work and do my job and go home. Well, in my view, that's not good enough. I think, in this day and age, I think it's fair and reasonable that we expect that people will be team players. And it's not a huge thing to do. It's not some great skill set that's required. It's just an attitude or a mindset. Number 3 on the list is a skills development role. That is, about self-improvement. I think it's not unreasonable to expect that people will continually upgrade and grow and develop in their profession or their skill set. But again, I often hear people say, look, I don't want to use this spreadsheet. I'm quite comfortable using the old one, or I don't want to do things the new way. I'm happy to do it the old way. Now, unfortunately, that does create problems for the team and the individual. And I think when you see the skills development role, you think, well, I can see how it could benefit the team, but you can also see how it would benefit the individual as well, because it makes them more employable. So for somebody who is not developing themselves, that is, upgrading their skills and whatever, are actually going backwards, because probably everybody else is going forward in that regard. So I don't think it's unreasonable to expect that people will get on board with their skill development. But again, it's not in the job description. And that's why I'm mentioning it to you, that it's critically important for performance. And the fourth one is the concept of innovation and continuous improvement. Now, whereas the skill development role is about the individual, the innovation and continuous improvement role is about the workplace. And so what this is really about is how do we make our workplace more efficient and more effective? Now, I would suggest that some of your team members probably think that that's your job. Well, it's not. Your job is to coordinate that, but many people have got ideas that you don't have, so it's really everybody's responsibility in the team. And so having regular conversations with people about that, I think, is extremely important. So you can see that these 4 non-job roles do impact on performance and agility. If you doubt that, think about a team who's a highly skilled team, very high skills, but everyone in that team has got a rotten attitude. Everyone in that team is not a team player. Everyone in that team is stopped growing and developing in terms of their own skill set, and every one of those people in the team think it's your job to be innovative and to be continuously improving the workplace. Now, I can guarantee to you, as I'm sure you'd be aware, that that team would not be a high-performing team regardless of its skill set. So you can see how critically important these non-job roles are. And I just want to illustrate that a little further for you. So a survey was done a few years ago, 2012, and basically in this survey they asked employers what was the number 1 job attribute that you're looking for in your new employees. So when you recruit a new employee, what's the number 1 thing that you want in there, for them to bring to the job, the new job? Number 1 on the list was enthusiasm and a positive mental attitude. They want people with a can-do attitude who are going to get in and pitch in and do what they need to do. Number 2 on the list is they want people with good communication skills, people who are willing to communicate with other people and listen and all the rest of it that goes with that. Number 3 on the list is they want people who are self-motivated and would be prepared to be proactive and show initiative in the right circumstances. Number 4 on the list is they want people who are honest. Number 5 on the list is they want people who like other people. They want a people person, because ultimately organisations are about bunches of people working together for a common cause. Number 6 on the list is they don't want people to stop too early. They want people to persist and to make sure that they see through what they're attempting to do. Number 7 on the list is they want people who can work in a team player, as I mentioned earlier. Number 8, they want people who have got reasonably good organisational skills and resilience, the capacity to work under pressure. Number 9 is they want people who are willing to learn. So there you go, there's that skill development role I mentioned. And number 10 is they want people who are dependent, that we can rely on them to get the work done. Now that list won't surprise you, I dare say, but what is surprising about it is that of those 10 attributes, not one of them is a job skill. So therefore, the point is that people are very keen on recruiting people who have the attributes that are mentioned there around it, and they're all non-job roles. So I'm just trying to underline the point that non-job roles are critically important to people's success. So therefore, you as a team leader should be talking about non-job roles in your team, and you should be spending time doing that, because if you don't focus on it, you won't get it. And because non-job roles aren't normally listed in the job description, people don't think they're that important, when in actual fact, you and I both know they're extremely important. All right, so that brings us pretty much to an end. I'd just like to leave you with a little quick plug, if I may. My book coming out, Winning Teams, is coming out hopefully at the end of the year, but who knows with COVID, but it's certainly going to come out very soon. I'd like to give you an offer of pre-ordering the book. So if you pre-order my book, all you've got to do is send me an email, and basically I can then either probably send you an invoice. What I will do for that, and the book was only $30 plus postage, but what I will do is I'll also send you a link to a free online course for building highly effective teams. In other words, you can learn a lot of things that are practical from the book before the book comes out. So you'll have access to that, and I value that at about $675. So all you've got to do is send me an email, as you can see by the close of business today, and I will simply put you on the list, and I'll send you a link to the course, and off you go, and an invoice. So I hope you might be able to think about that. Of course, there are discounts and all sorts of things for people who want to order more than one copy. So folks, that's it from me. Thank you for the opportunity of working with you. I hope that's been useful. I hope you can get some benefit out of that. Very soon I'll be sending you a copy of the slides and the recording, and you can actually have a look at it again. So thanks everyone. I wish you all the best, and look forward to catching up with the next free online webinar. Thanks everyone. All the best and goodbye. Thanks, Chris. Thanks everyone. Have a good weekend.